And now, another informative video from the NASA archives.
Jerry.
Well, I spent 9.5 years in the control center during Apollo. I started as a GNC during Gemini, and then became a flight director right before Walt's flight. And let me sum it up before I get into some detail. It was so much fun. It was exciting, but it was a hoot. Every flight we had had a problem. Some were nagging, some were very serious, like 13 and 12. But it challenged us in mission control, I think, to be at our best. We had to be. And I've often thought about how were we able to do that? Well, for one thing, we had a bunch of young people. That was Gilruth and Kraft's point from the beginning. They wanted to go out and get some young guys, and there weren't any gals to speak of at that time that were taking engineering or even science. And they did. And they wanted that because they didn't want some of the old aeronautics people who were great and became some of our leaders. They didn't want to have that ingrained, this is the way we do this kind of thought. And Fred mentioned John Aaron, who made the call on Apollo 12, and he also made the call on 13 and most of the power stuff that we did. He was in his early 20s from a little college in the state of Oklahoma, and he actually majored in physics. He didn't major in engineering. But we had a bunch of people like that. And then I think the secret of Apollo was our leadership. We had, and our leadership model was so important, we drove decisions down to the lowest possible point where the expertise was. We didn't try to elevate things and bring them up high because we were brighter the higher up the food chain you went. That was really brought home on Apollo 13. Let me tell you a quick story. I had been on duty and turned it over to Kranz. I went out to actually play a softball game, and they came out and got me and said, you better come back to the control center. And so when I got in there, Gene was going through hoops trying to figure out what had happened. And Glenn Lunny had just arrived. I've always told Kranz I turned over a perfectly good spacecraft and you screwed it up. But immediately we started figuring out what we had to do, and Fred went through those early steps of getting back on a free return, and then try to do a direct return after that. And what we did, we came up with about 3 different options. One of them we call the PC+2, Paracynthian +2 maneuver, which would speed us up by a day getting home, and it would also, and we'd use the lunar module to do that. But it also put us back in a good landing spot, because I can't remember where we were headed on free return, but it was way out in the middle of nowhere. So Lunny and our 2 teams had worked most of these 3 options. And I never will forget when we were ready to call the PC+2, that's what Glenn and I liked, we went up into the viewing room with most of NASA's leadership there. There was Tom Paine, who was the NASA administrator. Gilruth was there. Debus was there. Rocco Petrone, the Apollo mission director from headquarters, was there. I think Von Braun was there, although I can't remember for sure. And of course we had Kraft and Deke Slayton and all the leadership here. We went through, Glenn and I briefed this crowd and said, okay, here's what we can do, and this is what we think we ought to do. We think we ought to do the PC+2. And at that point, we just left it right there. We just stopped. And there was silence. You know, I think quite often today you'd say, well, have you thought of this, or have you thought of that, or why don't you do this? There was total silence. Finally, Tom Paine, the administrator of NASA at the time, said, how can we help you? They trusted these two young kids to tell them what we were going to do and that we had figured it out. They trusted us, we trusted them. And that was a great secret of Apollo, is the trust went up and down and the decisions were made at the right level. We went back into the control center, said, okay, we got a plan. We did PC+2 and got them home. Mission control, I said, was fun. That leadership helped, but it was also a dynamic time. And I think there's a message here for people that are going to go back to the moon and on to Mars. Operating with humans, cislunar or deep space, is different than Earth orbit. Your recovery times, if you have a problem, you can't get home right away. So you've got, even the comm delay at the moon gave us problems early on, until even on 8, we were stepping on each other. And we finally, the Capcoms went to a old World War II aviation over, kind of like we were talking on simplex. But we were talking over the top of each other because there was about a 1.5 second delay, not all due to distance, but our networks were slower then. And so I think you need to think about the future, Mark's guys in the control center and the astronauts and everybody else, that operating in deep space is a whole lot different. Of course, when you go on to Mars, it's totally different, and with the comm delays and all. But I really think what the people today are just as good as we were. There's no doubt in my mind. I watched them when I was center director here. I've watched them since. They are really good. They just need the mission to get pinned down and say go. There's one other thing I wanted to say. Mission operations, if you include all of that, I think too often we overlook Kennedy Space Center in their launch ops. Their launch ops were flight ops in Building 30 here. And actually during a countdown, we reported to the Launch Control Center. We were a go or a no-go. And those guys did an amazing job at the Cape. They really did get all those vehicles ready, and we could always count on them to do the right thing. At the other end, the recovery forces were also part of operations, and the DoD support was incredible. And so I think we need, when we think mission ops, think the whole thing. Flight ops, fine, Building 30 at JSC. But until Tower Clear, the Cape owns it, and after they're on the chutes, the recovery guys own it. So keep that all in mind, I think, for the future. And I wish, I hope you can stand on the shoulders of what we did in Apollo to get back to the moon, and Godspeed.